got an invite for a Gartner webinar, even though I think they also have some research saying that buyers don't want to meet with salespeople. This webinar that's coming up, and I assume there's research behind it, they say something like 43% of customers prefer a rep-free experience, but when they have a rep-free experience, they're 23% more likely to regret the purchase.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Hans Fuller. Hans is the founder and CEO of Storyslab. It's a platform to optimize every element of real-time customer interactions everywhere they're happening. Now, one of Storyslab's key customer bases, Hans's key customer bases, has been field sales teams. And we all know how field sales or field-based sellers have been impacted by the pandemic, but many maybe have been too quick to write off field sales as being obsolete and no longer needed. So we're going to ask today in this conversation, is that really the case? Are there still substantive advantages to in-person sales? If so, what are they? And what do they mean for how field sales evolves as we move into this next normal? Hans brings a unique perspective to this question. So it's an interesting conversation. We'll get into all of this and much, much more. But before we get to Hans, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast, wherever you listen to it. And if you could leave us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review, we'd really appreciate that. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Hans, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nice to talk to you again. It's I don't know, given what's going on in the pandemic and my inability to really track time or the passage of time. I'm trying to remember how long it's, 6 months ago maybe we first talked?
Something like that, yeah. I think we had a quick talk and kind of, in the middle of the pandemic, and here we are in the middle of the pandemic, I guess. But,
in the middle of the pandemic. Yeah, the more it changes, the more it remains the same, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I did get my flu shot yesterday, though, so I'm making sure I'm vaccinated on all fronts.
Right. That one's less controversial, I guess, right?
It shouldn't be, but yes.
Right.
It got noticed my health system, drive-through appointments. It was just nice and easy. So
right.
Just as it was with my COVID shot, which is also a drive-through. So tell us a little bit. So first of all, how do we pronounce company name? Is it Storyslab or Storyslab?
It is Storyslab. So
Storyslab, okay.
Yep, Story, which you're familiar with, and then Slab, which originally mobile based. So Slab, tablet, phone, Story, and Slab together.
Oh, got it.
Yep. Slang,
right,
but in the formal name of the company. Yeah.
So tell us what you guys do.
Yep. So we are sales engagement built for human use. Okay. So we are a technology company, and I'm a little schizophrenic because, we sell like a SaaS company, but we equip, for a, much more engaged sale. And I'm probably the only tech founder that gets accused of being a little bit old school. Just kind of our philosophy on the type of sale and how we're trying to equip folks, but we're doing it with technology. And then,
so what's old school about it? Well, I mean, tell us what you do first. Then let's do old school.
Yeah. So I'm obviously a tech founder. I started the company about 10 years ago. We bootstrapped our way, to a quite sizable market share, sort of in the sales presentation and sales enablement space. And so when I say old school, our origins were, very much as a mobile first platform intended for field sales users. So you can picture, reps getting in their cars, heading out for the week, staying in hotels, meeting with, 2 to 10 customers a day, and, doing it day after day. And if they're lucky, they had an office day on Friday, right?
And what was your product that they were using?
Yeah. So I'm sort of speaking of my history as a call it traveling salesman, right?
Right.
Our product is a content-based platform, right? So it's a content and presentation platform. I kind of shiver at the word content just because it's one of those words where it just gets overused and then nobody knows what you're talking about anymore, right? So when I say content, I like to think of it as the collective wisdom of the organization. Mm-hmm. Like whatever media that gets, that gets converted into could be, spec sheets from, 20 years ago, could be, the latest and greatest customer testimonial or case study, animation or CAD file and that kind of thing. So,
Right.
Content. Again, like I think it's a way that companies sort of capture the collective wisdom of the organization, and then we're the platform that puts it in the hands of salespeople, sort of when they need it, so they can best engage customers.
Got it. So, yeah, field sales sort of not great, obviously, since the start of the pandemic. So,
Sure.
Tell us a little bit what's happened with your business and how you've transitioned to away or still working there. Obviously, not all field sales went away.
Sure. Well, and I think the myth is I sort of started talking about like how salespeople hit the road and they spend all this time with customer, but that's a myth, right? They really spend very little time with customer and a lot of customers, and a lot of the things that they do have been always done asynchronously, right? So you're sending things ahead, you're following up after, and I don't know that I think maybe the last year notwithstanding. The amount of quality time you get with customers has been on decline for many, many years, right? So I think this is a blip. I think there's an opportunity though now to sort of make the best use of the time you get with customers going forward. And so our philosophy is, hey, meeting with customers, and I'll say face to face because the platform very much works in a remote world. Mm-hmm. But I think. I think we talked about this, 6 months ago. There's sort of this spectrum of sort of the time and quality time you get with customers. And, I'm not saying that all sales need to be done face to face and in person, but if the goal is to engage with a customer, there are very few substitutes for actually, sitting down across the table from a customer, meeting with them in person. Right. So, again, not that it can be everybody's full day, 8 hours in front of customers, but there is value. It might even be a differentiator if you can get in front of the customers, build that relationship face to face.
Yeah, well, and we'll get into that because I think that's I do want to talk about your perceptions about get your perspective on the future of sales, field sales in particular. Yeah. I think there's always been that there are, and we've seen this come to the fore in the last year and a half, is true misunderstanding of what field sellers do. And yes, there are some, as you described, that hit the road, spend make 8 to 10 calls a day, spend all day in front of customers. But then there also was a large component of people that called themselves field sales, but to your point, is getting in front of the time to get in front of the customers actually was getting harder and harder, and a greater percentage of the actual selling they did was of these people that were field sellers was done virtually.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there's virtually or in person, right? And then there's synchronous and asynchronous, and you get sort of different combinations of each of those. So you can do virtually asynchronous, which seems to me to be the lowest amount of engagement, right? Or at least in terms of seller buyer personal engagement, right? All the way through synchronous, real time sort of in person engagement, which presents the greatest opportunity, I think, to build that relationship and some kind of emotional connection. Again, call me old school, but I think if you're collaborating with customers, doing it face to face, and being able to problem solve with that person in the room is preferred, even if it's not the most efficient.
Yeah, well, I think there are instances. Yeah. Well, is it controversial? I mean, I'm sure that lots of people think you're crazy, and we'll point to the experience of the last 18 months and say, look, hey, we're able to keep on doing big deals even though we weren't able to go see the customer. And I've done lots of big deals over the years, not seeing the customer. But to your point is I think that as things open up again, is that for deals of a certain size, deals of a certain complexity, deals of a certain strategic importance for the buyer, that being able to see somebody face to face in person will have value.
Right. And I will I should have prefaced all this by saying that, we tend to deal with companies that oftentimes have to go on site to properly, apply the product. It might be a capital equipment purchase,
Right.
and takes multiple visits. It's not technology companies have been selling remote, and will continue to sell remote and do so very successfully. But we're sort of talking about companies where oftentimes you have a 25 or 30-year veteran of, say, applying that product to that industry. They're sort of industry specialists, and they go out there to collaborate and solve problems together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you can see that in those where those sales processes are not easy to define. You may or may not have clear stages, sort of where you are in that buyer's buying process. And again, like some of like a long-term project and a large capital sale, are subject to a few more twists and turns, and needing the ability to be flexible along the way.
Well, you raise an interesting point, is that obviously probably would scare some sellers, certainly some sales managers, as like, yeah, we're working on an opportunity with this company, and there is no defined sales process, because there really can't be by definition, because it's a more strategic nature. It's going to take time to sort of build to the point where there is sort of a formal opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and so I think, I again, like, we're sort of in this mode where we're trying to define processes so that we can train people and sort of bring them up to speed on our processes, and sort of get people to kind of move the ball forward with these accounts. And I sometimes wonder if we're overtraining for the process, if we're over measuring. Mm-hmm. And wonder whether whether we're giving a salesperson enough latitude, again, to figure out what what matters to that buyer, sort of what the next steps will be, trying to figure out that approval process, because a lot of these processes sort of assume a fairly homogeneous buying process and decision making process on the other end.
Right. Well, let's talk about that, because I've had this conversation recently with guests on the show. Is it's great to have a defined process, and I think companies need to have something documented that says, hey, here's our selling process. But it's only as good, as you said, until you go out and talk to that first buyer, because every buyer is unique.
Right.
I mean, they could be similar to others, but the people are unique. The way the individuals process information is unique. The way that perhaps the organization makes their decisions is unique. And so by definition, this idea of repeatable sales processes, as many companies talk about them, is sort of off base, because it's truly not repeatable. And so but what they do, though, is they sort of constrain the sellers from doing the experimentation they need to figure out how to deal in those situations.
Right. Yep, I agree. And I mentioned a little schizophrenic in that we're a tech company, and I've got some we've got a great process. We got rock star AEs that work that process and kind of move deals through the funnel, and try and increase the confidence in our pipeline. But we're oftentimes selling to companies that find it difficult to define their process that way. And so we're kind of selling a tool that affords a lot of flexibility for a certain kind of sale, certain type of salesperson, certain kind of product or service being sold. Yet we're very much, we're very much, I guess I won't say falling victim, but we're very much utilizing a sort of modern sales process, modern sales methods and metrics, and trying to be very data driven. Meanwhile, we're kind of, I won't say talking out of both sides of our mouths, but we're using this process, but we're saying, on the other hand, the companies that we're selling to kind of really appreciate the flexibility, and they need the flexibility, first and foremost, and then the metrics and data and sort of designing the process or tracking the process follows from that, as opposed to the other way around.
Well, I was interesting. I was reading something, and I think one of the blogs on your website that you guys had gone out, you had interviewed earlier this year, early in 2021, I think sort of in the spring, is a number of business owners about field sales. And I mean, reading through, like, granted, there's, a couple handfuls of business owners you're talking to, but of those that were at least featured in the article, it seemed like they really thought field sales was essential, right? Even though they could do some other stuff inside, is there was, at least for them, and they were not, SaaS companies. They were, some were more industrial and so on, but felt that, there's value there that just couldn't be replaced. Right.
I mean, I think the way I'd put it is they found that, kind of that in-person interaction. And, again, and obviously we're finding, lots of good substitutes online and that kind of thing. But that interaction and sort of building a relationship with the customer and again, the buyers oftentimes are buying the salesperson as much as the company and sort of the unwritten guarantee that comes with it. Right. So I think that, the way I put it is they were saying like that is essential. But I don't think they're saying that the way we used to do it, the maybe, too many in-person meetings and the excessive traveling, right? I think the compromise is like, okay, maybe we're overdoing it before, but the stuff, but the highest value versions of those meetings are still very high value, maybe even more, right? Because you have fewer and fewer opportunities to kind of meet on that basis.
Yeah, I have this theory, which is personal theory with no research grounding of it, though, is that yes, we've been able to accomplish great stuff in the last year and a half in the face of this pandemic and everybody going remote and through virtual and digital sales channels. But I think that what happens is when people get the chance to go back, they're going to find out that the face-to-face is better. It's not that you can't do it completely digitally, completely virtually, but I think this is just my gut instinct, is they're going to feel that it is better. And it's not just from the rush of being able to do it again. There's certain excitement going to surround the fact once we are more open and people can go. But I think they're going to find that for the seller who's prepared, the seller who is a seller that, as you said, you're sort of like your rockstar AEs that are, contributing value to the buyer and their decision making. Yeah, they're going to find that's, again, it's going to be used strategically. It's going to be used in a way that's important. You're not going to do it all the time. But quite frankly, smart companies were doing that for years.
Right. I don't know if you remember, I think it was a United commercial pre-pandemic, right? Where the sales managers is like, hey, like buys plane tickets for everybody. And,
decades ago, yes.
Right. Yeah. So I think we're of the same era, maybe. So remember that. But, again, not in the context of hybrid or remote work, but just like, hey, we got to get in front of our customers because, they've forgotten who we are. Right. So, again, there's a lot of modern substitutes for that. But I would say some of the companies I talk to, again, they're not like, just ignoring what's going on and insistent that, like, hey, we're going to go back to the way things were. But they see, in some ways they're hearing their competitors are just dramatically changing, like we're going to be remote, from this point forward. And they see it as a competitive advantage, right? A competitive advantage that, okay, like if you're not going to go visit your customer and form that relationship, then I will, right?
Yeah.
And I'll have early warning. I'll know like when the bids are open, who's going to get it. All those things that that you have, when you have that personal relationship.
Well, I'd written a post a few years ago. It's because I'd run into this travel reluctance from sales teams and more specifically in SaaS world, but not exclusively, but mostly there. And I said, the hot new strategy of the day is to actually go visit your customers. And I believe that if I had the opportunity to visit a customer and the competitor wasn't willing to do it, but at a time when the buyer was open to it, all the preconditions being met, I'd win the deal 9 times out of 10.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a competitive advantage, and actually, like among other definitions of engagement. Engagement is a emotional connection or commitment, right? So, so you can look under, wedding date and, a calendar appointment. And then it's, emotional connection or commitment, right? And what better way to get emotional commitment or connection than to meet in person? That's true in work life and personal life and that kind of thing, right? But anyway, we are a tech company, so I know we're sort of going off on, we're the philosophizing about in person or not, I also don't want to say that we're saying, hey, technology doesn't have its place in this, because it absolutely does.
Of course.
And quite honestly, you have the right technologies, and they'll tell you can measure whether the in-person meeting is moving the ball forward or not relative to the other, and you can calculate ROI on that. So so there's factor that in, and you can see whether whether it paid off or not.
Yeah, well, I back to what I made before. I think that there's so much mythology around. Everybody wants us to talk about how different things are. And there's a lot of mythology built up in sales about the way things, quote unquote, used to be, that just were never the case. And so, yes, it's been a big transition, work from home and digital and so on. But I think even people felt, I'm not saying field sales, but sort of hybrid sales roles, overestimate how much time they're actually spending face to face with their buyers. And the smart companies were doing it as I would do, as running sales for startups, is especially a couple of bootstrap startups. We didn't have the money to travel, but we were selling, things denominated in the high hundred thousands and millions per transaction. So we'd travel when it was necessary to move the deal forward.
Yeah, when it made sense. Absolutely. What are your thoughts on, there's some research out there, particularly, I think they've stepped it up during the pandemic about buyers, buyers wanting to see salespeople or not. Right. So I think there's there's some statistics that, most buyers prefer not to see salespeople. And, I guess the implication is like, okay, yep, let's, keep selling remote. I think that's kind of misinterpreting what those buyers are saying.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that, first of all, I don't think, given a choice, buyers never want to talk to sellers, right? I mean,
Right.
I think that's been true for as long as there's been commerce. Actually, somebody sent me a link to an article about the world's oldest complaint letter. It was written, a couple thousand years BC in cuneiform symbols on a stone or a piece of clay, I guess clay that had been hardened and baked, sent about a buyer complaining about dealing with the owner that was selling him ingots. So anyway, they didn't have a good time dealing with the guy on the sales basis. So I think that I think the equation's been the same for buyers for a long time, which is I don't have a need to talk with you if you can't contribute something of value in my decision making. And so as a seller, you have this pretty low bar to surmount, which is that, do you have the ability to contribute some value to the buyer above and beyond what they can find on your website or on a user review site or wherever, right? And in the absence of that, why do they want to invest their time in you? And so I think that it's not that buyers don't want to meet with sellers. I think it's the same as always, but maybe it's become more acute. They just don't want to spend time with sellers that can't add anything to them.
Right. They don't want to be sold. Right. They don't want to be, they don't want to be worked through your process or through your funnel. Right. If there's no value being generated along the way. I think if you ask that question a different way and said, would you like to meet with people that can help solve your problems? Right. The answer is different. It's like, yes, I would like to meet and talk to, valuable resources, might be salespeople, right, that can help me, understand my needs and solve my problem for me. So I think it's, I think the word sales and being sold has connotations with it that buyers are naturally going to say, no, I don't want that. I need problem solved, but I don't need to buy.
Yeah. I mean, it's just human nature is people resist being persuaded. And Jonah Berger, professor from Wharton, wrote a book published, I think, in 2020 called The Catalyst about helping people make up their minds or change their minds. And he has cites research in there showing that there's this fairly universal human instinct to resist persuasion, right? So many sellers, that's their sort of default mode when they start talking to people, right? I'm going to pitch you. And as opposed to solving problems. And so for a buyer, what they're saying is, look, I don't get a return on the time I invest in you when you do that. So I have no need for you. And that's fine. But I think I don't think that's new. I think that's been the case for buyers. Maybe they have less tolerance for it now, but I think that's always been the case in my experience. Yeah, I mean, the Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon, who did research on this, wrote this white paper in 1971 where he talked about there's going to come a day. I think he was sort of forecasting the internet. I don't know if he knew about any developments at that time, but he's saying there's come a day in the not too distant future where we're going to be bombarded with information, all these multiple sources of information. And how do we as people make a decision about where to invest our time? And yeah, I'm paraphrasing what I said, but basically I said we make an economic decision, right? Is this time, this investment of time, are we getting a return on it? And if we don't, then we're not going to invest any more time in that source of information. So you think about, buyer or sellers, in a sense, are basically communication channels and the source of information. And if there's no value, then you don't get any of the buyer's attention. I think it's always been that way, but I think maybe buyers have more sources of attention. As Simon said, they have more sources of information contending for slices of their attention.
Right. Yeah, and I think sort of the channel terminology, like it used to be that you wouldn't consider sales like another channel for to get information and solutions to a customer necessarily. Not like you would say email marketing and those kinds of things. But I think more and more it's very fair to treat the sales reps, whether they're remote or in person, as just another one of those channels, right? That the buyer has a choice of using, along the way, right? And so the more you can make the human channel, like one of the more fruitful and sort of easiest ones to use, the more likely that buyer is to use that as the channel that they use to solve this problem, as opposed to going online and looking at you, but then flipping over to your competitor and doing the same thing over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to sort of summarize buying, what the buying process, what the buyers are trying to achieve is very simply say, buyers are trying to do is they're trying to quickly gather and make sense, i.e. understand the information they need to make a good decision with the least investment of time and attention possible. And so if you can help them achieve that, then they're going to give you time. If you can't help them achieve that, they have no time for you.
Right. Agreed.
And so conventional sort of salesy behaviors that we talk about on the show, and that everybody's sort of familiar with these sort of stereotype behaviors that we see so many sellers indulge in. Increasingly, that's why it's increasingly difficult for sellers like that to get an audience with buyers. Right.
Yeah. Agreed. And I don't know. I got a invite for a Gartner webinar, which even though I think they also have some research saying that buyers don't want to meet with salespeople.
Right.
This webinar that's coming up, and I assume there's research behind it. They say something like, I have some numbers here. It says 43% of customers prefer a rep-free experience, but when they have a rep-free experience, they're 23% more likely to regret the purchase. Right. So I think this is kind of like the other side of the coin. It's like, okay, yeah, you don't want salespeople, but you're proceed at your own peril without them. Something like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's what's the value to a buyer of talking to a seller? I mean, it comes in multiple forms, right? I mean, it could be, hey, the seller asked me questions to force me to think about a different aspect of this challenge we have and the outcomes we can achieve in a way I hadn't thought about before. Sort of the classic challenger model. Okay, that's a good reason to talk to a seller. One is maybe validate some sort of validation of the decisions we're making. Maybe it's helping us frame what we're trying to do in a way that mitigates some of the risk potential. I think there's a lot of reasons why buyers would regret not talking to sellers. And I think that this is, one of the myths that again, that sort of accompanies, this is in my mind, myths that accompany research like this, is this idea people read it and sort of take as a blanket statement is that, yeah, buyers don't want to talk to sellers. And it's like, I don't think that's the case. I mean, as long as there's risk associated with the purchase, I think they absolutely do want to talk to a seller.
Right. Absolutely. So, I think you mentioned the type of selling that you used to do. And, I was curious, did you ever get mistaken for an engineer when you were out there selling or
No.
in here selling? No,
no. I mean, I was a history major, but in tech my entire career, and in very complex technology. I spent a big chunk of time in the satellite communications business. So, and I was working for startups, selling mission critical communication systems against huge brand name tech companies. At the time, satellite companies and oftentimes defense companies, multi-billion-dollar multinationals, and we were nothing. And so we had to find, a more effective way to sell than just to get the attention of the customer. So, yeah, and that's why I smiled like when the Challenger sale came out, because it's like, well, of course, that's one of the primary things we did years before Challenger was even a figment of somebody's imagination. This is how we competed. Yes, we tilted the playing field, and changed the nature of the game as much as we could.
Yeah, so the other thing that sort of occurs to me as we look at sort of training, again, I'm flipping back and forth between how we help our client base, but also how we train our own folks in the process and understanding the use cases and so on and so forth. It's pretty easy to train on how to sell something, very difficult to train on how it's bought, if that makes sense. So, what I mean by that is we have a process for selling and sort of defining the use cases and creating a sense of urgency. And like to me, that's something that you can bring a salesperson up to speed on within 3, 6, say 9 months if it's more technical sale, right? I think that last 10% of like really figuring out like what it takes to close a deal is understanding how something is bought. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these cross-functional decisions, it's oftentimes I don't think the buyer knows exactly how they buy this thing, right? So I mean, they're you don't know, right?
Something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. How often do they buy something like that, and whose pet project are they stepping on if they propose this thing over what they're using today? Mm-hmm. And so I think is there a big it feels like there's not an IT element, but are they going to come out of the woodwork and that kind of thing, right? So I think like the thing where it takes some experience and sort of understanding and sort of teasing out. Like everybody will tell you they're a decision maker, right? And you can take them at their word or not, right? And then and how many of us have had that situation where, okay, it looks like this person said they can make the decision, we're ready for the signature, and they're like, oh no, there's 3 other sign-offs that have to happen, right?
If we're being honest, we've all had that experience.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Yep. Absolutely. It happens all the time. And so you have to be realistic about, really understanding how this thing is bought, how the buyer is potentially going to behave, what other things, come up in that process. And I think,
right. But I think one of the things that we make this hard because we continue to, picture sales as a process that doesn't really align with the process the buyer's going through. And it seems like, and I know a couple companies are sort of talking about this and their products that they're selling, but there's just one process in my mind. There should just be one process. They're trying to make a decision about making a change. They're unsure all the ramifications of what making the change will be. They're unsure of what outcomes they can achieve as a result of making the change. And it's just one process. And as long as we continue to have these processes that aren't even parallel for the most part, sales process and buying process, it seems like we're continuing to sort of come back to some of the challenges we have as a sales profession is how do we best help the buyer?
how do you best help the buyer? How do you set up a process to make sure things move forward, sort of on the seller side, but accommodate what the buyer needs out of it, right? In the order that they need things. And
Well, but just a simple example is, why do we denominate the stages in a sales process in a way that the buyer doesn't identify with? Buyer doesn't talk about a discovery stage, right? Oh, they're coming and discovering us today. We'll click that. No. I mean, you can look at Gartner did their famous sort of spaghetti diagram of the buyer's journey. I sort of yet to hear of a company that sort of said, yeah, we're going to sort of really jigger our sales process and use this terminology. There are 4 core jobs buyers are trying to accomplish in the heart of that diagram. Why wouldn't those be the stages of a sales process?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think again, sort of speaking from as a founder that's trying to make our sales process more process driven. I think part of it is that CRM and buying processes and stages are pretty linear, and I don't think that that a buyer's process is quite as linear or
not at all.
Right.
I mean, look at that Gartner diagram. It's
right.
You could, as they talk about in their research, is you could be they had these 4 jobs. You could be partway through accomplishing the second of the 4 jobs, and then a new stakeholder gets introduced, or a new vendor enters the equation they hadn't talked about. Goes back to the beginning. So it's not linear at all, and that's reality, right? If you've ever dealt with a large enterprise sale. There's no straight line about it.
Right. So you have the flexibility, not only in the needed in the process, but Andy, I apologize.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
I drew a blank there.
That's okay. We're all. Yeah. This is. During like the pandemic, I was getting a kick out of people saying, "Well, let's remove distractions. We don't have dogs in the background, and so on." It's like, it's perfect time to illustrate that we're all just human. So no problem with losing train of thought at all. It's been great. I think that there's still a lot to be written, obviously, about future of field sales. Obviously, it's never going to go back completely the way it was before, but I think that just sort of summing up is that I'm firm believer that, and actually I'm talking to some people already doing it, getting out, going in front of customers where their competitors aren't. They're finding some advantage in that, and I think that'll continue to be accentuated with those companies that are willing to say, at the right moment, the right time to move the deal forward, to add the specific value to the buyer and their process. Going out, getting on planes could be a good idea.
Yeah, well, and I think the other key is sort of flexibility in sort of adjusting to what the buyer needs and how they are how they're buying that process and viewing your solution. So I think technology solutions that sort of add that flexibility, but also capture the data. Again, that's kind of what we're striving for here.
Cool. All right, Hans, thanks so much for joining me. If people want to learn more about Storyslab or connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yep. So obviously we're on the web and in the book. If people want to track us down, that way. If they want to find me personally, on LinkedIn, I have my contact information posted there, including my phone number. So feel free to dial me up if you want to continue this stream of consciousness for your own business.
Perfect. All right, Hans, thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks, Eddie. Have a good day.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Hans Fuller, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.